So another museum oddity that I'd like to show you guys is another one dealing with Henry Miller. This was Henry Miller's Buggy. Uh, to understand a little bit more of why this one's kind of important is to kind of understand Henry Miller himself. He was a German immigrant born in 1827, and he moved to California by the time he was roughly about 25 in 1850, right as the gold rush of 1849 was continuing through into the next year. And he came to San Francisco. He was a butcher by trade. That's who his dad was, and he kind of took up the trade from him back in Germany, but he didn't really want to stay in Germany. It felt stuffy and very still. Not many things were happening. He wanted to be where new men were making new fortunes and not be in a land where every kid did what his father did and stuff. So he moved to New York, and in New York he found that it was kind of the same. Very established butchers would be in places. He did a bit well for himself there, enough to really get a trip to California. There's more story to that, but to understand this Buggy is to understand who Henry Miller was, and as he was starting his butcher business in San Francisco, he started buying land and buying land and buying land. It eventually became kind of the big thing about him is that by the time he died, he was one of the largest landowners in California, and probably the largest. That's why we have a huge map of the land he owned in the next behind this wall, is because of how much land he owned for the Miller and Lux cattle empire. And they would all be grown in the valleys, grown in different spots, and then driven across like Pacheco Pass, and then into San Francisco, where they would be butchered and their meat used to feed the growing population over there, and then eventually the greater population in the Bay Areas. And because of his style of business, he was a very stubborn man. He was very stuck in his ways. He didn't really want to change off that, and he also needed to be everywhere. So this man, Henry Miller, was a man constantly on the move, constantly going to the next ranch, going to the next place he owned, to the next land he owned. He would be going from here nearby the Canal Farm all the way to Gilroy, and then he'd be in San Francisco for business dealings. Then he'd go up to Oregon for some land he owned up there, and there was a whole subsidiary of Miller and Lux up there, which was even big on its own up there. He'd go to Nevada, he'd come back here, he'd go north, he'd go south. He owned land essentially everywhere. There were a few exaggerations of that, but this Buggy would be the thing that would be driving him. It's a horse-drawn buggy. You don't see no engine right here. And he actually, he would ride in this, and he would be sitting right here. His driver for the long time was called John Buggy. Not much more information about him, but he was his longtime driver for a while. Eventually, this was getting too old for him. He didn't want to change. He didn't want to move off of this buggy or move on to a gas vehicle or automobile at the time, because really he saw it as the devil's vehicle. I have a direct quote from him written down right here. When he was asked about it before his family eventually pressured him on it, he would say, "I hope my daughter don't get the idea of getting one of the devil's inventions." So he viewed modern automobiles as the devil's invention, and he really didn't want to move off this, but his family made him. He was getting old, it was getting hard on him, he would have to go slower on these roads. Automobiles was more smooth, even though a lot of the roads weren't improved for it back then. His family was trying to look out for him and say, "Hey, you need to be in an automobile on this point. You need to really get in with the times." And by this time, it was 1909, and his family pressured him to buy a Pierce Arrow. Actually, they bought it for him. The family bought it for him and said, "You have to use this now." It was a Pierce Arrow. It was a two-bencher. If you look at photos of those, they're actually pretty nice, pretty big cars. Some of them survive to today. His new driver at the time, Mr. Aggard, Henry Aggard, he became the chauffeur, and in some of his recollections, he was asked about by Raphael Milliken, was how Henry Miller really came up to using automobiles. And at first, Aggard says that Henry Miller told him, no, you drive 25 miles an hour at most in this devil's buggy. I don't want to go any faster than that. Eventually, Henry Miller relaxed into it, and he could get to Gilroy, and to get from here in Los Banos to Gilroy in about 2 hours, and his chauffeur would slowly ease him in to things to miles per hour higher than 25. Eventually he got used to it, eventually he liked it, but for the longest time this was his buggy. Even when he was slowing down the roads with horses and stuff, he didn't want to move on. But yeah, this is Henry Miller's personal buggy. This was actually restored in, let me find the date right here. Shoot, it doesn't say. But it says after Frank Latta, he actually owned this one for a while. And when he died, he willed it to the museum. And eventually, Americo Mariucci and the Bank of America here in town, they had a partnership and they restored this back to its mostly former glory. Back in about 1907, this buggy would have sold for $45.50 and $12.75 for an extra pair of rubber tires. Because back in the day, they didn't have pneumatic tires. You didn't have a compressor nearby. So a lot of it was rubber. What would now be called flat frame, like a dolly or something. This was the tire of the time. And you can also see, if you come into the museum, these have wooden spokes, which may be weird if you're so used to modern cars that are all aluminum or steel and stuff. But these have wooden spokes. A lot of this is full-on antique. And you can see the iron springs that would kind of provide a bit of the suspension. Again, pretty rough at the time. It was getting too rough for Henry Miller himself. But yeah, that's one of the another oddities we have in the museum. It's another of Henry Miller's. There's a lot of those in here for good reason. He was he was, hard to find the words for it, a founder, in a sense, of Los Banos. The land that Los Banos currently sits on was his land. The original Los Banos, the old Los Banos, was located halfway up Volta Road, about where the canal splits. That's where old Los Banos really used to be located at, until he had the railroad come in through his land. The alignment you see where the rail trail is today, and where it continues up north to Tracy, it used to continue also south down to Fireball, where the tracks end now, and go all the way south. And that was where that was the reason why Henry Miller basically paid to relocate all of old Los Banos, any of the buildings willing to do it, all the way over to the current town site of Los Banos. And really, that's why we have so much of his items, is because of how important he was to the construction, he paid for a lot of the stuff here in town. A lot of the early buildings he paid for out of his own pocket. A lot of the moving of the buildings from different places came out of his pocket. And for practical reasons as well as altruistic, it got him a workforce. Los Banos was kind of a company town, in a sense. A lot of later company towns like Ford's and like Pullman Automotives towns, those were completely centered around that industry, versus what Henry Miller built up here in Los Banos and in Dos Palos and in Gustin. What he really built up were towns that could be self-sustainable without him. A lot of the workers here would work in his industries and his stuff, but they were also self-sustainable in their own certain ways. And now Los Banos, it would be hard to say it. Most of our workers worked in agriculture. A lot of them commute over town now, and that's how it's changed. But that's why we have so much of Henry Miller's stuff here in Los Banos' Milliken Museum. Hope you enjoy.
Quick note while editing, the museum sells 2 books on Henry Miller. They're both great. The Cattle King by Treadwell is a great read, and One Man Show was made using a lot of the archive materials we have directly from Ralph L. Milliken himself. I highly suggest you give them a read and learn more about the legendary Cattle King.
Oh, I almost forgot to mention, if you'd like to learn more about the Milliken Museum, please come to here. Like to learn more about Los Banos' history in general, and to see these oddities and even more stuff that I haven't shown on the brief tour or the last oddity video. There's so much stuff here. If you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to do a deep dive or just have a brief 20-minute tour looking through our things, just come to us. We're at 905 East Pacheco Boulevard. We're open 1 to 4 p.m. Most days except for Monday. We don't do Mondays. We're also closed Christmas and Christmas Eve. If you want to schedule an appointment for a better day, for better hours, whatever works for you, please call the number I put here in the captions. Have a great day.